Environmental Dashboard is a technology, but as much as that, it's an approach and a platform that's really designed to combine public displays of real-time resource use and environmental conditions within institutions and communities with community voices to engage, educate, motivate, empower, and celebrate environmental stewardship that's taking place within communities. I just will quickly mention there are all sorts of organizations out there that have helped make this happen. US EPA, Great Lakes Protection Fund has been very generous. And I don't yet have GLCA up here, but they should be up here. But lots of different organizations, lots of collaboration on this project, including with, in our case, the city of Oberlin, a very tight collaboration there. And that'll make some more sense later. So I want to start with what might seem like a little bit of a strange slide, a slide of sort of images of what we imagine life was like for 99.9% of the 50,000 years of modern human evolution, in which human beings lived in this very close relationship with the natural world. The decisions we made as individuals, the decisions we made within the context of communities, were intimately informed by what nature was doing around us. So our ability to survive and perpetuate our genetic information was very much determined by how well we responded to environmental cues: water, light, temperature, soil conditions. These were things we intimately understood and were connected with. So the point is, feedback was really fundamental to our ability to survive, feedback from the natural world around us. You fast forward to today, and here we are, like most North Americans, we spend 90% of our lives within buildings now with temperature control, so we're very much separate and disconnected. And so one of the premises that we come at this from is this idea that bringing about this more sustainable relationship between humans and the rest of the natural world is at least some level predicated on reintroducing feedbacks, probably new kinds of feedbacks. We're not going to go back to where we were then, but can we somehow leverage technology, the power of technology, and use it not to separate us from nature, but to reconnect us with the natural world? So that's sort of an overview of the context in which we've been working and trying to develop technology and approaches. So it's not as though feedback has disappeared from our world. We're still very much informed by feedback. The ecological systems in the world can still be sort of broken down and thought about as sort of feedback relationships between organisms. If we think about human beings and sort of psychology, the way we learn and understand the world is very much informed by interactions between people, feedback between human beings in that context. And increasingly, we're introducing very sophisticated feedback within the built environment, technological feedback to control building systems, to control many things in our lives. But I guess the point I want to make here is that these feedbacks are now pretty separate from each other, whereas they used to be all a part of one connected system. These are sort of isolated feedbacks from each other. And in many ways, although I'm enthusiastic about sort of smart building technology, which can make buildings more efficient, in some ways, some of the technological feedback in its isolated little form is actually doing more to separate us from nature than to connect us with nature. When lights are turning on and off around you, you don't need to make those decisions. In some ways, that's taking more control away from people and isolating them yet further from decisions which are having real impacts on the planet. And so we've been focused on something that different people are using different names for it, but some people are calling this socio-technical feedback. But it's basically developing new modes of feedback which really combine these other modes. So you're directly sensing the impact of human decision making, you're directly sensing impacts on the environment, and you're combining that into information which is meaningful, emotionally resonant, takes advantage of what we know from social psychology to change people's way of thinking so that they make better decisions. So some people call this socio-technical feedback. Some people have called it eco-feedback, but that's kind of what we're trying to do, is introduce these new kinds of feedback that help people to better contextualize, understand, and be motivated by information about the impact of their decision making. So kind of the fundamental question we've been asking is, how can we leverage the power of feedback to motivate and empower social, ecological, and economic transformation. So really trying to get those three pieces of sustainability together. And one of the things that we've sort of come to in this is this understanding that in terms of mindset, what we're really trying to do here is to develop something that builds systems thinking and action. So systems thinking is the ability to understand the world in terms of connections and interrelationships between parts. That is, someone who's a systems thinker is someone who really sees themselves as an integrated and important part of a larger whole and understands what they're doing in that larger context. So these other points under this are really kind of corollaries of systems thinking, really. So we're interested in fostering a stronger sense of connectedness and belonging to social, economic, and ecological place. How are we part of that larger place? To situate individual decision-making, bless you, in this larger community context. To share and celebrate the things that people are already doing to move us forward on the environment. And Cindy later will talk a little bit more about that idea of really focusing on the positives of what we're doing as a psychological approach to moving us in a positive direction. And at the end of the day, of course, we're interested in not just affecting the way people think about and conceptualize the world, we're interested in affecting the way people interact and behave in that larger world. So really trying to advance sustainability and resilience within communities. So we are actually not the first people to think about feedback, introducing feedback as a way of motivating behavior change. There's been quite a bit of work. Most of it has been done in the residential environment, looking at what happens when you introduce electricity feedback, feedback on how much electricity you're using to people in their living environments. And in general, it's thought that in most residential environments, about 50% of the electricity consumption is something that people in the building have some sort of direct control over through light switches, what they turn on and off. And then about 50% is sort of background stuff that facilities people can control, but the occupant can't directly control. So there was a great meta-analysis of lots of studies that had looked at feedback in residential environments done a couple of years ago, in which they summarized that basically about 4 to 12% of the electricity use can be reduced through just introducing feedback. So that's sort of a summary of lots and lots of different experimental work and lots of different ways that people have provided feedback, from normative comparisons on utility bills to in-home meter devices. That's sort of an ancient one of the first ones there on the right. But it's all about sort of introducing this feedback. There's some important caveats, though, to this idea of introducing information feedback that we want to draw out. One is that there's lots of evidence from social psychology that merely providing people with information does not necessarily in any way change behavior. Some really depressing studies, actually, about bringing people to workshops, teaching them a bunch of things, and then following up with them to see if they've actually done any of those things. And it's a little on the depressing side. The other thing, too, is we often operate with this assumption that, it's all about economics. You provide the right economic incentives, and people will do the right things. That may be true on sort of a macroeconomic level, but it's not really true at the level of individuals. There's plenty of examples. You provide people with lots of good economic reasons to do something. That's not necessarily what's motivating them to do things. Another problem to think about is that because we're so separate from resource flows, even the units, the currencies in which resource flows occur now, are alien to us. We don't understand what a kilowatt hour is, or the difference between a kilowatt and a kilowatt hour. It's confusing to people. They don't get it. So just telling people how many kilowatts there are is not necessarily going to motivate them to do anything, because they don't understand the meaning of that. The bottom line is that we need to develop a more sophisticated approach, sophisticated messaging, really thinking about the psychological packaging of information that gets delivered to people. So this is kind of a summary. So part of this is based on some work we've done, but a lot of it is from the literature of ways you can make feedback impactful, ways you can make it motivate people to do things. So one has to do with just accessibility. It's not actually feedback unless people are getting the information. So it needs to be accessible, it needs to be actionable. You need to give people information that either changes their thinking or gives them direct information about how they could change their behavior now in order to affect the system. It needs to be tight feedback. By that I mean, I'll use the antithesis of this, your utility bill is not tight feedback because it happens once a month. it's aggregated over a scale in which you don't know what you did that affected that utility bill. It's just a big bill. You don't know what you're going to do about it. That's too coarse in terms of both time and aggregation. You can't do anything with that information. Another key aspect is, I've said that economics and information are not the major drivers. There's overwhelming evidence within social psychology that even though we don't believe this as individuals, the most motivating thing is social norms, our perception of how we're doing relative to other people. So making things socially comparative, how am I doing relative to how I've done in the past? How am I doing relative to groups that I'm part of? How am I doing relative to groups that I aspire to be part of? Those are really the things that are most motivational and driving us to make decisions. Another real key here is the idea of connecting with people's emotions. So the reality is that most of the decisions we made are not actually the result of some sort of logical thought process. They're based on heuristics, they're based on gut senses of what we should do. And so while it's important to provide people with a good logical argument about why they should do something, if we really want to motivate them, we have to figure out ways of delivering that information in a format that taps into people's emotional response to things. So emotionally connecting individual and group consumption decisions with larger ecological and social communities. So that brings us to these three components of Environmental Dashboard, which are kind of collectively designed to accomplish some of these goals. And we're going to talk about each of these things. Rumi gave a little bit of an overview, but just so that we start again with these. Building Dashboard monitors and displays resource consumption in individual buildings and groups of buildings. Citywide Dashboard monitors and displays resource consumption at the level of whole organizations or whole communities. And Community Voices combines images and words drawn from communities, and it's designed basically to celebrate pro-environmental thought and action and to build basically an identity around that within communities. That information obviously needs to be delivered to people. We see digital signage as being really key to this, getting the information in people's face, in their space. A website's also an important tool, but it's sort of secondary in some ways because people need to have seen it in order to want to get there. There's a larger barrier to accessing information via website. And then finally, we're not really going to talk much about this component within this workshop, but the Building Dashboard component has a very sophisticated set of tools designed for building managers to allow them to really understand low-hanging fruit, what actions might need to be taken, problems that are occurring within the system. And again, we're not going to focus on that so much here, but it's in the technology, so I thought I'd mention it. All right, so let me just try to put together some of what I just said into kind of a conceptual model of the feedback. So we've got people, they're making decisions, choices about resource consumption. Those choices are impacting the natural environment. That natural environment is, of course, affecting social communities as well. So this is the system as it exists right now. What we're talking about with Environmental Dashboard is introducing three different levels of feedback into this sort of existing causal chain of events here. One is the monitoring of resource flows within individual buildings, installing metering, and then developing displays to create this sort of feedback loop which makes people more aware of the resource consumption taking place within their individual buildings. The second part, which we just started working on more recently within the last 5 or 6 years, is beginning to really monitor resource flows at a larger scale, at whole organizations or whole community scale, and introducing that as feedback too, so you can situate what the consumption in your building means in terms of its implications for the larger community. And then the last component that we've been developing and think is actually particularly useful for this sort of interdisciplinary context is the Community Voices section, where we're actually engaging people in the community, eliciting what the things that they're doing, they're thinking about, and then using the dashboard as a context, a conduit for putting that information back into the rest of the community so people are more aware of the many things people are doing, the many ways people are approaching issues of sustainability. So we've got that feedback in there. All right, so I'm not going to spend tons of time on this, but I just want to give you a sense on some of the technology as it exists now, as it may exist in the future, some of the opportunities for that. So this is sort of looking at the particular way in which we gather information in Oberlin. So we gather information from all of the dormitories in Oberlin, 27 dormitories. the public schools, as Rumi said, a section of apartments and businesses within the community. And in these we've installed sensing technology. That's what this picture here is of sensing technology going in to monitor flows. So new sensing technology in those facilities. All of us in the United States are moving towards a situation where it will be much easier to gather this information. The so-called smart grid is all about creating greater interconnectivity between metering and the utilities. But within that technology is the capacity to extract that information without installing new hardware. So for instance, in Oberlin, all of the meters on every house, water and electricity, actually have little radio transmitters on them that can transmit information about resource consumption. The way our utility is using that is they drive by in a truck with a radio receiver once a month, so they don't need to actually walk up to a meter to read it. But it has within it the potential to transmit that to its central receiver and basically deliver that information in real time, which then would mean you wouldn't have the cost of installing new sensing technology. So it really allows this sort of thing to happen on a much bigger scale, and we've been sort of trying to crack the technological nut of making it work. The utilities haven't really, they're doing it for their own purposes. They haven't really thought that carefully about how this technology could be used for consumer public-facing feedback. So it's kind of a technological slog to get data out of their system because they didn't design it to do what we want to do with it. But it's there, it exists. So the last piece of gathering technology has to do, and we understand you have a public utility here, which is great. We have a public utility in Oberlin as well. We've worked very closely with them. That guy on the right there is the director of the utility plant, the electrical plant. The guy on the left is their sustainability person. So we've worked very closely with the utility basically to tap into their data system, extract that data, and deliver it to dashboard so it can become part of the display. So the data we'll play with later on city use, it's coming out directly out of our public utility. Same deal with freshwater and wastewater. In this case, and Jessica and I talked a little bit about this, we've installed additional technology. That's our wastewater treatment plant. Like all wastewater treatment plants, it's on a river. So it delivers water into the Plum Creek in our case, and we've installed sensors upstream from the wastewater treatment plant and in the effluent, and then inserted that into their data gathering system. So we collect all of the data from their plant, but we added a little bit of technology so we get more ecological information, not just conditions within the plant. So we can put all of that together. And those, by the way, are some students who've been involved. And those are, that's YSI equipment up there on the right. So it came from Yellow Springs. So there you go. They make great stuff. Expensive as heck. I hope you guys get a better deal on it, you know, as neighbors than we do. Each one of that woman there is holding a $10,000 data sonde. Hopefully you can get it cheaper. All right. So shifting now to the actual visualization technology, the building dashboard. This is a screenshot of what you would see looking at one of our dorms at Oberlin. Harkness is one of our more far out culturally dorms. It's actually a cooperative residence, a student co-op. But so they see a display that looks like this. And we're going to play with this later so you'll get a better sense. This is just sort of screenshots. But you can see if you sort of were to scroll through this, you'd see this animated character changing their behavior. The name for that character, and anyone can name it what they want, but we call ours Flash the Energy Squirrel. But we call it more generally an empathetic gauge. Again, it's designed to create that emotional connection between people and resource use. You know, it changes its emotional content depending on, you know, your level of current resource use. So again, this is technology to monitor and display electricity and water use in schools, businesses, public facilities, and homes. And we're going to get a chance to play with this later, so I won't say a whole lot more about this because it's more fun to just sort of interact with it. Again, we'll interact with all this stuff. I'm just showing you sort of the interface where you would select what buildings you want to look at. Some of the sort of different features that exist within the building dashboard component of this. Again, we'll play with that later, so I'm going through it quickly. But I will just mention some of the ways in which we're trying to leverage what we know from social psychology in the design of this. So the socially comparative part is very important. This particular screen is showing the gray line is yesterday's use, orange line is today's use, so you can see how am I doing relative to how I've done in the past, how I normally do. Competitions, we think, is a huge part of this. We've been running competitions between dorms at Oberlin since 2006, and national competition since 2010. And then the ability to sort of do some budgeting too, so you can see how am I doing on given days. Set a budget, we're going to use this much energy over this time period, and see how you're doing according to that budget. All right, so the next component of this is Citywide Dashboard. So this is an animated display of electricity and water use and environmental conditions within whole communities. And so what we're trying to deal with here is the reality that for most people, they have no idea where their water comes from, they don't know where their water goes to, they don't know where their electricity comes from. And so the decisions that they make in their homes, in their schools, in workplaces really are sort of not connected with any understanding of resource flows. So how do we build a stronger sense of connection between the natural resources on which people are dependent? And so what we wanted to do is sort of translate the city into a form that was sort of animated by resource flows. So this is sort of that translation here of basically a conceptual landscape which has recognizable buildings within it with gauges on it that tell you how much resources are being consumed right now. So I'll walk you through the different components of it. We've got sort of where your electricity comes from, or this is where your water comes from, where your electricity comes from, sort of the business section of a community, dominant organizations within a community. That's sort of iconographic buildings for Oberlin College, green spaces. We put a house front and center to represent the decisions that you as an individual make within your home, within your workplace. The gauges on the right show you in real time, as of this minute, how much electricity, how much water are being used per citizen of the community. You can walk through different sections of this. And then we have the empathetic character up here who has different messages that they can display. And you create whatever message content you want, and the character will give you those messages. So again, we'll play with this later, but this is kind of at least a video screenshot of what it looks like live on the website. So on the electricity section, you see the flowing electrons down power lines, total city electricity use, what's being used for water treatment, the CO2 emissions associated with that. On water, you see flows of water in the wastewater, freshwater treatment plant, water flowing down lines. Through homes, through businesses. This is our other character, by the way. That's Wally Walleye. He does water animations. Watershed. So these are now coming from that YSI sensor in our in Plum Creek, gathering data on dissolved oxygen, on depth, on turbidity, other environmental parameters, and then weather conditions. So you get a sense of these things. So partly what we've been working on is, for those of you who know about technological minutiae, we developed the first version of this in Flash, which was sort of the state-of-the-art in graphics animation technology for many years, until Apple decided to completely sabotage it so that it's no longer supportable. And so we've been shifting to the newer technology, HTML5. What we see online is actually still Flash, so if you have a little iPad, it's not going to work on your iPad. This is the new version, which we'll be very shortly releasing. So it looks exactly the same, except the gauges look a little bit different, but it's in HTML5. But the idea is that the buildings in here can be swapped out to represent other landscapes. So you've got sort of the dominant city organizations, the dominant organization you're trying to feature, and this is just some examples of some of the prototypes we've developed for other communities. So large scale here, that's San Francisco, and an organization we work with called Lucid. This is the city of Toledo and their public schools. So their public schools are all getting building dashboards in them, so we've been working to try to develop that component. So yeah, I thought I had something else in there, but I don't. So I'm going to pass this on to Cindy, who's going to talk a little bit about the Community Voices section.
So the Community Voices piece is really making a different kind of resource visible, which is our social relationships with each other, right? So human relationships, human ideas, human behaviors are another kind of resource. And there are all kinds of behaviors that we engage in that are about sustainability that are actually kind of invisible because they happen behind closed doors. You know, your neighbors don't know at what temperature you set your thermostat. They don't know how long your shower is. You know, they may know that you recycle because you put your bin out by the street, right? But a lot of the behaviors that we engage in are invisible. And so Community Voices is about making this resource visible. So we're combining pictures with words that come, they're authentic quotes from community members to celebrate the thoughts and the actions, the beliefs of people in our community to help move our culture towards one of sustainability. Okay, and we have 6 different categories of messages. We have a number of messages that come from children. We call that next generation, and we think that children are probably particularly effective spokespeople for many environmental issues. So we have students, for the large part, who have gone out into the community and engaged in interviews with all kinds of people. And one of the things that we've really tried hard to do is to make sure that we are soliciting information from parts of the community that otherwise maybe don't get listened to so much. So we're trying to highlight not just the traditional leaders, the people that everybody automatically thinks of, but people that we don't think of, people who are actually doing important things, but they're traditionally in the background, and we want to make sure that we highlight those. We also want to make sure that when the general community is looking at this, every single segment of our community sees someone up there that they relate to, someone up on the screen that they feel like is part of their in-group, who they belong to. So in Oberlin, we have a pretty sizable African-American population, so we made really super sure that we were hearing from those people. There's kind of a stereotype out there that African-Americans don't care about sustainability. It turns out that's really not true. They're doing all kinds of things. They may not even know that the other members of their community are doing those things. So we want to make sure that that information gets out there. So here is a woman who won a competition to not drive her car. I forget what they called it, but it was
Alternative Transportation Board.
Yeah, so she won this competition. She was very proud of herself. We did an interview with her. She actually contributed a lot of great quotes. I think we have another quote of hers coming up later on. Another thing that we're trying to do here is to create connections across time. So part of sustainability is thinking about the future, right, and making sure that future generations can support themselves. But there's also a lot of strength to be gotten from drawing on the past, and we want to draw on our rich heritage and use that for information, for inspiration, and to create a sense of continuity, right? So at Oberlin, we have a really proud tradition of coeducation, and we also have a proud tradition of bicycles. So we had students work with the archivist, both the local heritage center and also at the college, to go through lots of old photographs and pull out quotes. And so here you see, this is obviously a photo from I don't know when, but several decades ago, to help emphasize that it's not that this is some weird new thing. Oberlin has always been like this. Our downtown features businesses, and this is again trying to create those 3 legs of sustainability. We want to emphasize that economic issues matter also. And here we have our owners of the bicycle shop. One of the things that students discovered when they went into the community to do these interviews with owners of various businesses, often they would start the interview by saying, oh, I'm not really doing anything related to sustainability. I don't know why you want to talk to me. But then a few minutes into the conversation, it became really clear that they were actually doing all kinds of things. They just hadn't thought about it that way. They hadn't realized or put it in that context. And so by engaging in these community interviews, we're not just getting great material and putting it up for other people to see. We're also changing the way that the interviewees see themselves, right? So now, these business owners who thought they weren't doing anything about sustainability have this image of this self-image of themselves. But yeah, actually I am part of this. So changing people's identity is another really powerful way to change their behavior. We have images of Oberlin that are beautiful and celebrate the nature component of Oberlin. And here we have another quote from Valerie, because when she won that contest, she did a lot of bike riding, so she was talking about riding her bike here in this quote. And this helps to remind people of how beautiful their home really is and to connect people back to the natural world. And then we have a number of slides that highlight ways in which people are giving to the community. And this is a picture of John and 2 local teachers and some students, and actually an elementary school student, celebrating the fact that we got Dashboard into the public schools. They're now using it in their science curriculum. They are doing resource reduction competitions between the schools. So this is a way that we have reached out to the public schools to try to serve them. We have other slides, different organizations, local organization that spays and neuters cats, for example. That's part of sustainability. That's part, cats, feral cats are part of the ecosystem. So really very broad umbrella. We're really trying to expand people's sense of what sustainability means. It's not just hippie, crunchy tree huggers. It is actually everybody, and it does encompass all kinds of things. And then finally, we have lots of pictures and quotes from children. And we have teachers in the public schools who, as part of lessons, for example, one of the grades, they do a lesson on communication. And so part of what they do is they generate artwork and messages so that children can be environmental leaders. And so we're empowering children to be spokespeople, and they see their stuff up on the screens and they're all excited and they make their parents look at it. So that's a way of drawing parents into this. Parents get excited when they see their kid or their kid's artwork up on the screen. And we also, we think that, that children have the potential to be really effective spokespeople for environmental messages, that perhaps they might be able to say things to adults that the adults might be more willing to hear something from a child than they might be from another adult.
Okay. Let me make a quick comment. I know that there are several people here a couple of people from the media department. The dashboard, because it's in public spaces, don't have sound integrated in it, but we began a conversation with folks in our cinema studies that can you challenge students to make a silent video of an appropriate duration. So we know that duration can be as short as the vine, to 6 seconds, or it can be, So within a very small length of time, can you make a silent video that conveys a certain kind of message or represents something related to sustainability? So just to, we haven't done that yet, but I think that's a very exciting potential project.
Right, so we've already talked about this. The digital signs we see as like a key venue for delivering this, so the information is right in front of people where they are as opposed to them having to go someplace. So these combine all the features of Environmental Dashboard. They're kind of sequenced, so it will go through Citywide and Building Dashboard. And each sign can have location-specific content, so the display that the Building Dashboard content in our public library is showing electricity and water use in the public library, in that building, not at other buildings. And then community voices. And then also there's the potential for whoever is hosting that sign to insert lots of content that's specific to their organization. So in the library, book features that focus, whatever they've got going on, sometimes environmental books, but sometimes other things that have nothing to do with the environment. We have one of these displays in Oberlin Community Services, which is sort of our food pantry organization serving a low-income community. And it has lots of content in there that's about their particular organization's mission, that sort of thing. So calendar features, community-wide calendar features, so you've got a common calendar that everyone's able to look at in the community. So part of this is also about creating multiple reasons for people to look at the screen. So maybe the building dashboard component is not the most exciting thing to you. Maybe it is the most exciting thing to you, but you're going to see it in the rotation. Maybe the calendar is the most interesting thing for you. Maybe it isn't, but you're going to see the community calendar. So the website, which we'll play with later, has, you know, sort of this deep ability to explore and interact with it. That's particularly useful in the context of teaching. So yeah, we'll talk more about that later. So I guess I'll say just a couple things about teaching with Dashboard and some of the ways in which we've begun to use it. And I should say that, you know, so we are sort of, I guess, the lead on introducing this technology to other schools, but we're still very much in the early stages of figuring out exactly how it might be used in the classroom. We just ran a workshop at Oberlin College for other faculty who haven't really been involved in the project. So we're still really exploring this, is my point. It's not as though we have, you know, figured out the many ways that you might use this, but the ways we have used it are in the context of our introductory environmental studies class. We have a very project-based environmental studies class. I think that probably resonates very strongly with Antioch, project-basedness. So there are a lot of project groups which are doing specific kinds of interviewing to develop content for community voices. So this particular semester, I know you guys are involved in the climate action plan for Antioch. We have students who are reviewing both the city's and the college's climate action plan and trying to extract good quotables from that, which would end up on the signs. And then they're also interviewing people who are part of city council, which is responsible for implementing that for the city, and people in Oberlin College who are responsible for the college's climate action plan, so we can put faces and quotes of people and connect it with the policy. Most people in Oberlin, they know that the city's moving forward on the environment. Most students at Oberlin, they know the college is moving forward. They know nothing about specifics. So put some real information about, this is the policy. By 2025, we're going to be climate neutral, or we've broken our agreement. You know, put that up there. Let me think of other community voice content being developed this semester. Lots of people working in public schools this semester with kids to try to work on developing more kid content. We have a course called Ecological Communications that Deborah and I taught this last year that's very much about just basically working on environmental dashboard, using it as a venue to train students in various modes of communication and education. So it's just a context in which students are doing very real things because they're helping to develop this and what they do will end up being part of this larger system. Just about everything you see has in one way or another been developed or advanced by students working at Oberlin, yes.
And I just think it's just such a powerful way of students who are wanting to make a difference. How do we become activists? This is a course that helps them think about, you don't do things to people. You do it with people. You know, that is just a very tight way that they're mentored by us as they learn how to be activists. So when they graduate, they can go out, whatever they're doing, and think about them being environmental activists.
Yeah, we'll say more about this when we talk about community voices, but it really is a very different way of having students engage with the community. Our students learn ideas in classrooms, and many times their idea of community engagement is taking whatever they learned and sharing it with the community, so they think of themselves as disseminators of knowledge. I see that frustrated look. But community voices is exactly the opposite. What we're doing is we're giving them a context to go out into the community, and they're asking questions of the community, but they're recipients of the wisdom that emerges within the community. So it's really a very, very different thing, and it creates that meaningful context, a reason why they're out there in the community asking different members of the community, what are you doing, what's important to you, what's your vision of how we move forward on this? So it's really very, very different. Rumi teaches a class called Energy in Society, which, as the name implies, focuses on that, and obviously this is very relevant to that. Sounds like you've got some course stuff here that's similar to the seminar, perhaps. So obviously there's lots of playing with the dashboard in order to better understand resource flows. There's also a lot of sort of private readings, research that students are engaged in. We have sort of a research team which includes faculty and students. The students are really quite central in helping to design and execute on research associated with Dashboard, and we have lots of students on lots of publications that we're getting out on this stuff. And they manage the community voices. I mean, when I look at community voices now, most of the time I haven't even seen the content on there, so I'm seeing it for the first time. because it hasn't been filtered by me. It's gone through this sort of cadre of experienced students to get to that point where it's public.